nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram itam shri radhika prana nata pada sarojayo yena premanubhutyasya dattam tam shri gurum bhaje Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupan Anyabhilashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shashvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payurasho Murāke Dato Bande Bhagavatan Iman Anulavam Murdna Nipatyakshito Namah Shri Krishna Chandraya Nirupadi Kripa Krite Yo Shri Chaitanya Rupa Bhut Tanvan Prema Rasam Kalo Tadrisha Bhavam Bhavam Prataitam ihayovataram ayataha adurjana gana sharanam sajayati chaitanya vigraha Krishna jayatam surato pangor mama mandamater gati matsarvasva parambojo radha madana mohano Adadana-strinam dantair yacheham puna puna Shrimadrupa parambojo Dhulisam janma janmani Abhirapali patiputra kanta Dasya bilashati balashvavara Shrirupa chintamala sapti sangsto Durdantamutsvantahai churastam Raganugami bhajano lasamanasanam Shri Radhaya sahasara smaratam brajandhum Shri Rupa Parakamala Shrita Chetasam me Chittam satam nirup madhukari Yatupada Padme Bhaktir ya nikilarga varga janani ya brahma sakshat krite Anandatishaya prada vishaya jat sokyat vimuktir yaya Shri Radha Ramanam padam bhujayugam yasya mahanashrayo Ya karya vrajalokavat gurutara premnaiva tasyai namah Ya ramya nikilaga sanga shamani shochatritim sangata Ya swadhya rasikai sukabdi janani dhikarya mukti spriham Yadhyata hridaye vrajendra tanuja premamrita syandini sajiyat hari bhakta vrinda mohita dhanyeha Padyavali. By the grace of Shri Kali-yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Avatar, Prema Purushottam, Karuna, Mahasagar, Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnava charges, the fulfiller of his heart's desire on the earth, Shri Rupa Goswami Pad. Again, today we'll resume our discussion of Padyavali. And we're coming now to near the end of the Dainyokti Prakaran, or the section presenting expressions of humility. So we'll proceed with that as follows. Next, the compiler cites an expression of humility in the form of a prayer to Bhagavan, arising from feeling oneself to be devoid of any recourse, as a result of considering oneself a sinner. So when one has repentance or one has awareness of their own wrongdoing, then they feel subject to the consequences of those actions, and in other words, they don't have any means of avoiding them, so they feel, so to speak, without a recourse or without any support from being in a unfortunate situation. So when one feels oneself to be a sinner, and we can take it more broadly to be an offender or a wrongdoer, be it with reference to the worldly or with reference to Bhagavan, then without either undergoing the full consequences of those actions or receiving some grace, there is no other option. So the person feels thus without recourse, and in that way feels humility or a sense of lowness within themselves, as well as a state of arti or a sense of unrest or distress. So in that spirit, this verse is expressed. śaraṇam asi hare prabho murāre, jaya Madhusūdana Vāsudeva viṣṇo, niravadhi oh gosh, that's a typo. Oh dear. Niravadhi kaluṣaugha-kāriṇaṁ, gati-rahitaṁ Jagadīśa, rakṣa. You are my shelter, O Hare, O Prabhu, O Murāri. May you triumph, O Madhusūdana, O Vāsudeva, O Viṣṇu. Please protect me, a perpetual perpetrator, of a flood of sins, devoid of any recourse. O Jagadīśa, please protect me. The undertone of, quote, may you triumph, or jaya, is your abiding above all is the cause of deliverance for someone in a condition such as mind. So I've left that a bit literal according to the Sanskrit, but it sounds a bit abstract in English, so a little more clearly it means the following. Only you who are veritably the supreme entity have the capability to deliver someone as fallen as myself. So because you are supreme, because you have such qualities, such power, etc., that you excel all others, then there is hope that there is some deliverance for me, because it could only be someone in a supreme position who could deliver me because I'm in a most fallen condition. This is what he wants to express. A further undertone is, quote, there would be no deliverance for me were it not for your supremely triumphant self, since no one but you has the capability, to deliver me, the most fallen of the fallen. The three invocations, O Madhusūdana, O Vāsudeva, O Viṣṇu, allude to Bhagavan's capability to deliver jivas from samsara. The name Madhusūdana is explained in the Brahma-vaivarta Purana as follows. In the name Madhusūdana, the word madhu in neuter gender refers to honey wine and to auspicious and inauspicious karma that has been performed. And the sudana, that is destruction, alluded to in this name, is of these karmas of bhaktas. He who performs the destruction or sudana of madhu, that is, the sometimes initially sweet results of the inauspicious karma of the ignorant, is called Madhusūdana. So this is an interesting interpretation. So the word madhu most commonly means honey or nectar or sometimes sweetness. So here he's taking sweetness to mean in karma, which is comparable to honey wine or wine made from honey. So something that is inebriating or causes pollution of the psyche. This is a way that karma can be understood. So from the idea of madhu the word madhu, meaning honey, can also be used to refer to honey wine, perhaps euphemistically in some cases. So from this honey comes, meaning this inebriating effect, and since karma is polluting of the psyche, then that can be considered the honey wine, or the quote-unquote honey that one has. So Madhusūdana is he who sobers you up, or in other words, who destroys the inauspicious effects of your karma. In other words, purifies the psyche of the unfavorable impressions of inauspicious karma, namely sinful activities, which may produce some sweet results in a superficial sense of some material pleasure when they're initially performed, but later on turn into poison when the harsh consequences of those sinful activities are also experienced. So this is one way the name Madhusūdana can be taken, specifically in the context of this prayer. So where he's praying to be protected, where he's considering himself a sinner, then it's likely that the intent of the name Madhusūdana in this case is along these lines, as a destroyer of the consequences of one's inauspicious karma or sin. Sri Vidyabhushan Pad also offers the following explanation of the name Madhusūdana. The name Madhusūdana refers to he who destroys, niṣādayati, the madhu, that is, the samsara, of those who remember him. As per the statement of Shiva, madhu is a word for samsara. Gosh, that should be highlighted. Thus, the name Madhusūdana means destroyer of madhu, that is, samsara. So Bhagavan can bring someone's samsara, or someone's perpetual transmigration within material existence, to an end. So when he's saying, "O Madhusūdana, please protect me," or "may you triumph," means, you who destroy samsara, may you be victorious. So for him to be victorious, he has to destroy my samsara, or for him to be triumphant in who he is, or to actualize his name Madhusūdana, he needs to purify me of my inauspicious karma, or terminate my samsara. This is the suggested sense of using this name. So the names Vāsudeva and Viṣṇu were discussed in the commentaries on verses 35 and 37. So there the name Viṣṇu was explained to mean he who's all-pervading, or who's present everywhere, pervading all planes. So when he's praying for Viṣṇu to protect him, then to use the name Viṣṇu is also indicative of Bhagavan's being present there with him and capable of protecting him. And similarly, the name Vāsudeva, as was discussed earlier, one meaning of it is that devata that oversees the psyche, and also he who dwells within everything and in whom everything dwells, or who's the dwelling place of all. These are senses of the name Vāsudeva. So they may be, the poet may be using them loosely in general, or specifically to say you who are all-pervading, and you who are in whom, dwelling in everything dwells in you, and you have this capacity to purify and to free souls like me, so may you do so. Something like this will be the sense. Bhagavan's being, quote, ever triumphant over all, further suggests that the author thus regards Bhagavan as most worshipable and bows down to him, as he says this. When the author does so, Bhagavan inquires, "Why do you bow down like this to me?" The author replies, "You are my shelter." And with the three invocations, "O Hare, O Prabhu, O Murāri," the author alludes to Bhagavan's worthiness of being his shelter. The names Hare and Murāri were discussed in the commentaries on verses 60 and 34. So the name Hare, we gave an explanation from the Charitamrita, which means he who can remove an auspiciousness and he who can captivate your mind by giving you prema. So if he's saying, you are my shelter, O Hari, the sense is, you who have the capacity to remove all this sin, remove all this inauspiciousness in me, you have the ability to bless me with prema, to thus captivate my mind. Therefore you are worthy of being my shelter. It is in you in whom I can find shelter in this situation. Similarly, the name Murāri, which most commonly is understood to mean the foe or the enemy of the asura named Mura. We also discussed interpretations of the name where Mura is the name of the asura Mura comes from this act of mur, which can mean to cover or encompass something. And this Mura asura is said to have had the power to kill those whom he touched or those whom he surrounded. So if you take it in that sense, then the word Mura can mean something encompassing, in other words, bondage. So we discussed commentaries where that bondage was understood to be ignorance, or why is the jiva bound in samsara? Fundamentally because of beginningless ignorance, or anadi avidya. So the foe, or the destroyer of Mura, then, is the dispeller of beginningless ignorance. So why do I have all this inauspicious karma? Why am I a perpetual perpetrator of sin? Because of my anadi avidya. So you who can destroy anadi avidya, you are worthy of being my shelter. This we can take to be the suggested sense of the name. And then the name Prabhu is explained by Baladeva Vibhushan Pad as follows. He is called Prabhu because of his being capable in regard to all types of action. So the root Prabhu literally refers to the idea of capability or power. Power meaning the ability to do things. So Prabhu meaning like the powerful one or the capable one. So why is Bhagavan called Prabhu? Because he's capable of performing any and all types of action. And then we have a little bit more in-depth explanation. Because of his accomplishment of acts impossible for the devas and others to perform, even after his appearing in the universe with a form and manner bearing resemblance to human beings and others bound by karma, he is called Prabhu, literally capable or powerful. So this is an interpretation specific to Bhagavan Sri Krishna, as in the case of his bringing the son of his guru and the son of a brahmana back from death, protecting the life of Parikshit when he was burned by a brahmastra, bestowing a divine abode upon contemptible persons like Gantakarna and Jara, and awarding moksha to those killed in battle. So if Bhagavan is quote Prabhu, or has the power to do all of these type of things that defy all conventional, rules or norms or limits, then he certainly has the ability to deliver me from my ignorance, deliver me from my sinful condition. This is the implication. So you are worthy of being my shelter. May you triumph in your nature, which is all you have to say. In other words, he can only triumph by accomplishing his deliverance of me. So the commentator goes on a little further. After the author states that he bows down to take shelter, Bhagavan asks, in hope of what do you pray to me for shelter? Okay, you want shelter, but what do you want? What are you actually seeking? You don't just want to sit here. So the author replies, O Lord of the universe, I am a perpetual perpetrator of a flood of sins, and thus devoid of any other recourse. Please protect me, please protect me. That is, please bestow bhakti to yourself upon me, and thus safeguard me. So as we've discussed repeatedly in this section, when we read prayers like this along the lines of the school of thought, if you will, of Uttama Bhakti, then whenever someone is saying, save me from samsara, deliver me from my sin, then we don't interpret that to be a form of Sakam Bhakti or a form of Anya Bilash, but rather we, so to speak, give the poet or the author the benefit of the doubt and assume that they're making this prayer in the spirit of Uttama Bhakti, in which their fundamental objective is only to achieve Bhagavan, to serve Bhagavan, to please Bhagavan, and they're praying for deliverance, or they're praying to be protected for the sake of accomplishing that principal aim. So the commentator supplies that here, and we've already discussed in this section examples of the commentators explaining this principle in relation to Prahlad Maharaj and others. So then another question might arise, why does he say rakṣa rakṣa? Why does he say protect me twice at the end of the poem? Once would be enough, why would he say it twice? So the author twice prays, please protect me, to induce swiftness on Bhagavan's part, as though he is calling out for protection in fear of an immediate danger. Which the commentator gets a little colorful here and renders as follows. The summation of my sins has assumed the form of a rakṣasa and is now rising to devour me. Save me, save me. So, I'm not exactly sure where he got this. I don't see anything else precisely in the verse that is suggestive specifically of a rakṣasa, but nevertheless it does the trick of conveying the idea of urgency and the gruesomeness of sinful reactions. But in gist, he's just saying that the replication of the prayer is to indicate the intensity of unrest that the poet feels, and thus that he is wishing that Bhagavan will be swift in his allocation of protection to him. So in gist, the prayer for protection and urgency solicited from Bhagavan in the verse under discussion indicates the author's feeling of humility, arising from an ardent desire for bhakti and repentance for the sins I could just say he has committed. So to tie it into the prakaran, how is this an expression of dainya? So one sense of dainya is arti, or a sense of distress and unrest. So he's feeling that state of unrest and therefore praying for protection, praying to be able to fulfill his principal aim of rendering bhakti to Bhagavan. So there you have it. This is verse 69. So now we'll come to verse 70. Next, the compiler cites an expression of humility in the form of a pronouncement of Bhagavan's being the one and only shelter of a bhakta. Dinādau murāre, niśādau murāre, dinārdhe murāre, niśādhe murāre, dinānte murāre, niśānte murāre, tameka gatir-nas, tameka gatir-na. At the beginning of the day, O Murāri, at the beginning of the night, O Murāri, in the middle of the day, O Murāri, in the middle of the night, O Murāri, at the end of the day, O Murāri, at the end of the night, O Murāri, you alone are our shelter, you alone are our shelter. So, apart from the meaning of this verse, there's obviously charm in the construction of the composition, where, as you can see, he repeats the name Murāri, and he repeats the same words for beginning, middle, and end in the compounds with the words day and night. So you get a nice replication and rhythm, so to speak, throughout the expression. The name Murāri was discussed in the commentary on verse 34. So as again, the name Murāri can mean who frees one from bondage, that is, frees one from ignorance. And alternately, another interpretation that we also discussed, given by Kaviraj Goswami in the commentary on Krishna Karnamrita, was that Mura can also mean contempt. So to say that one is the enemy of contempt is to say that one does away with that, with contemptibility. So, in other words, to be completely free from any contemptibility is to be completely beautiful or completely lovely, completely desirable. There's no nothing small even that one could dislike or find dissatisfying. So he takes it then that Murāri means one who is supremely beautiful. So that interpretation is especially apt in the context of the Karnamrita, where Krishna's Madhura Rasa with the gopis is being described in detail. But here, we can take it in that way, or in a more broad way, since the sense here is a prayer for shelter in the spirit of Dainya, perhaps more the sense of Bhagavan's being a protector of his bhakta, protecting bhaktas from asuras like Mura, protecting bhaktas from ignorance. This is perhaps more likely what the author had in mind, but all senses are possible. And this verse also, by its construction, suggests the importance of continuous remembrance of Bhagavan. We hear the statement, Smartavya satatam Viṣṇur vismartavya najatuchit, that we should always remember Hari, we should never forget him, and that this is the purpose of all the injunctions in the Shastra. All rules, regulations, what have you, are meant to serve this idea that we enter a state of uninterrupted remembrance of Bhagavan, or what Jiva Goswami more broadly calls samukyata, or intentness or attentiveness to Bhagavan, which is said to be the fundamental basis of all spiritual progress and attainment. So, to say that he is our shelter all throughout all the phases of the day and the night is also to say that, our mind shall be fixed upon him. We will conceive of everything throughout all time as the unfolding of our relationship and of the opportunity to render service unto him. Okay, so now we come to the final verse of this prakaran, which we'll give some extended discussion of, because it comes to us from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So we come now to the 5th verse of the Shikshastakam. So throughout here, the Padyavali, we've given some extended comments on specifically those verses. So this one will also have a bit longer commentary. As I've said repeatedly, many of these other verses you could comment on them more and more elaborately, but as often in the Charitamrita or the Chaitanya Bhagavat, for fear of the volume of this book becoming excessively large, we have kept it simple, or we have tried to be concise. So we're trying to avoid excessive elaboration, but also as a way of giving special honor to the verses that Rupa Goswami has included of Sriman Mahaprabhu specifically. We're creating that little bit of not abnormality, but a special feature of, or special exception within the overall methodology. So we'll look at this verse in some detail. We'll dive into some of the philosophical basis of it, as well as the spirit of it and its practical application in the life of a sadhaka. So the introduction is as follows. Next, the compiler concludes this section on expressions of humility by citing a verse of Bhagavan Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which expresses such earnestness to attain a direct connection with Sri Krishna's lotus feet, and the opportunity to render personal service to him, that a prayer is made even to become like a particle of dust, that is, to become like an insentient entity, because of the invariable fixity that a particle of dust is observed to exhibit. In other words, it's tough to wash off the dust. If you have any calluses or slightly, hardened skin on your feet and you get a bit of fine dust in there, even if you pour water over your feet, even if you wash them, still the dust can stick, right? So in that sense, the dust shows this special ability to remain fixed on the feet of Bhagavan. So he's saying, let me become like that. So as we'll get to ahead, it's not that literally he wants to be a particle of dust, but that he wants to have that type of strong fixity, or that unwavering attachment to Bhagavan's feet that a dust particle can be seen to have. And of course, if this isn't too much, we can say, at least in theory, but nevertheless, we hear these statements in the works of our Goswamis, like, Swaparnar Buddha Nirmancha Haripaja Rajakana. For example, Das Goswami Pad describes Radharani with a name, saying, she, who with hundreds of millions of her pranas considers a particle of dust on the feet of Hari necessary to be wiped away. Or in other words, she who with hundreds of millions of pranas, in other words, vitality to the nth degree, or you could say with millions of lives, is ready to expend them or to dedicate them to removing even a particle of dust from Krishna's feet. So in other words, to say, she has an infinity of attention, of attentiveness, and to rendering even the most minute personal detail and service to Sri Krishna. So this is, a way of illustrating the idea of prem to the ultimate degree. So this is said in the case of Radharani. Rupa Goswami also writes similarly of Lalita Devi in connection with Radha Govinda Radha Mukunda Padasambhava Garma Bindo Nirmanchanopakarani Krita Deha Lakshyam, that to remove one bead of sweat on the feet of Radha Govinda, then Lalita Devi has 100,000 bodies ready as means to do that. And more broadly also, Rupa Goswami in his definition of Nitya Siddhas describes all Nitya Siddha Parikaras as those for whom Bhagavan is more dear than a crore of their own pranas, or a crore of their own lives. So, therefore, we could say that although this idea of a dust being invariably fixed on the feet of Bhagavan makes sense to us, we could also argue that this is only theoretical, because when you have Radharani and this many gopis around, how would any dust get left? In other words, if there's all these gopis with this type of intensity of prem for Krishna, then no dust particle is going to last long over there. They're not going to allow that. So you might say that this example could be argued with. But we wouldn't dare argue with the example given by Mahaprabhu himself. So I hope this isn't, this humor is not in poor taste. But rather that the concept is quite clear, and we can say that, we can relate to the idea of dust being stuck on the feet from our worldly experience and take that as an idea, or an idea of unwavering fixity that we then aspire for in connection with Bhagavan. So this is the overall prayer. So this verse is the 5th verse of Srimad Mahaprabhu's Shikshastakam, and Sri Kaviraj Goswami Pad introduces it in his exposition, a few typos tonight, of the Shikshastakam in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita as follows. In intense humility, again Prabhu prays for the gift of bhakti in servitude. In this prayer, he considers himself a jiva in samsara. So in other words, his mentality in this case is that he's a samsari. He's a jiva bound in samsara, and as such, he's praying to Bhagavan. And although his prayer is, let me be like a particle of dust at your feet, Kaviraj Goswami is saying he's praying for the gift of bhakti and servitude. So you might say, a particle of dust doesn't do any seva. A particle of dust is actually just a disturbance to the feet of Bhagavan. But nevertheless, Kaviraj Goswami is saying when he's praying to be like a particle of dust, what he's actually praying for is the chance to serve Bhagavan unwaveringly. And this likeness to a particle of dust is just being spoken as a way of referring to that inseparability or that close fixity of the servitude that he aspires to render. And I'm going to pause for 1 sec. It sounds like some mridanga and fairly loud kirtan has just started downstairs where I'm staying. I just want to check if that's disturbing to anyone listening. Okay, I'm either totally not audible or no one heard what I said, so...
No, it's not a problem at all.
Okay, not a problem at all. Okay, great. Perfect, then I'll just carry on. In intense humility, again Prabhu prays for the gift of bhakti in servitude. In this prayer, he considers himself a jiva in samsara. One of Swayam Bhagavan Sri Krishna's purposes... One of Swayam Bhagavan Sri Krishna's purposes for appearing as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is bestowing bhakti upon jivas bound in samsara. And not just bhakti in general, but the prem bhakti found only in his supreme abode of Braja. So we're going to look at this prayer as a teaching to jivas in the context of Mahaprabhu's purpose for appearing in the world. So I've given a summary of that here from the 3rd chapter of the Adi Lila in the Charitamrita. I'll just read the translation for brevity. After his descent at the end of the Dwapar Yuga, Sri Krishna muses, quote, "For a long time I have not bestowed the gift of prema bhakti upon jivas in samsara, and without bhakti the world has no stability. That is, the jivas in the world of samsara never transcend samsara and reach any eternal attainment, any eternally stable position. The whole world engages in injunction-based bhakti, or vidhi bhakti to me. There is no power in injunction-based bhakti, however, to attain braja bhav. The whole world is mixed with awareness of my Aishvarya. My satisfaction does not come about, however, through prema slackened by such awareness of my Aishvarya. By performing injunction-based worship with awareness of my Aishvarya, people go to Vaikuntha upon attaining one or more of the 4 types of mukti, namely sarshti, that is, possession of opulence akin to mine, sarupya, possession of a form akin to mine, samipya, abidance in my personal abode, and salokya, abidance in my domain. Therefore, I will personally accept the bhav of a bhakta, and I will teach everyone bhakti by practicing it personally. Dharma cannot be taught if one does not follow it personally. This is the conclusion sung in the Gita and Bhagavad. Propagation of the Dharma for the age can be done by an angsha, that is a partial manifestation of myself. No one other than I, however, can bestow Braja Prem, since it is said, there are many all-auspicious avatars of he of lotus navel, but who other than Krishna is the bestower of prema upon even creepers? Thus, I will personally descend to the earth with my bhaktas and engage in various merriments. Musing thus, Krishna personally descended in Nadia during the first phase of the age of Kali. That is, he manifested himself as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. One of the extraordinary characteristics of the Braja Prem that Sri Krishna appeared as Sriman Mahaprabhu to distribute is that it imbues everyone with the spirit of servitude to Sri Krishna. Quote, this Krishna Prem has an extraordinary effect. It induces elders, equals, and juniors to foster the bhava of servitude. Hear the evidence of this, the exposition of the Shastra in this regard. since the experience of the great ones, as recounted in the Shastra, is the strongest evidence. The discussion of this subject in Chaitanya Charitamrita goes on to present numerous evidences from Srimad Bhagavatam to demonstrate how not only various devatas and rishis throughout the universe, like Brahma, Shiva, Narada, and the Kumaras, and not only the supreme devatas, Lakshmi Devi and Mahavishnu himself, consider themselves servants of Krishna, but Sri Krishna's elders in Braja, such as his parents, Nanda and Yashoda, Sri Krishna's elder brother there, Balaram, Sri Krishna's friends like Sridham and Subal, and Sri Krishna's lover there, the gopis led by Sri Radhika, all foster a bhava of servitude within their respective loving relations with Sri Krishna, since it is only by means of loving desire to serve, the bhava of a bhakta, that one can truly relish Sri Krishna's sweetness, or madhurya. There is no taste of Sri Krishna's sweetness in mere equality with him. One relishes his sweetness through the bhava of a bhakta. This is the conclusion of the Shastra and the experience of the wise. Ignorant people do not understand the power of bhav. So, we know this is a statement that Baba loves to hammer. Munalok nahi jane bhavera vaibhav. So, what's significant here, this is essentially like a condensation of almost the entire 6th chapter of the Adi Lila, apart from the parts dealing with Advaitacharya, that Krishna Prem inspires everyone with the spirit of servitude, because Krishna Prem causes such relish of Krishna's sweetness that this evokes such a desire to reciprocate that one is ready and eager to render service of any type to Krishna as per the circumstances, as per the norms of the exchange, in an outpouring of reciprocation, of eager, willing, natural reciprocation for the bliss, for lack of a better word, of experiencing his madhurya by virtue of that bhav, or by virtue of prem. So this occurs even in the case of everyone. So we hear about Nanda and Yashoda speaking of themselves even like servants of Krishna, Krishna's friends even speaking of themselves like servants of Krishna, Radharani and other gopis speaking of themselves like servants of Krishna, Mahavishnu speaking of himself as a seeker of Krishna's darshan, Lakshmi Devi doing tapasya to get Krishna's darshan, Narada, the Kumaras, Brahma, Shiva, so many devatas, all worshipping Krishna, seeking to have darshan of Krishna, etc. So this prem that Krishna appeared as Mahaprabhu to distribute, in just what does it do? It inspires everyone with the desire to serve. It inspires everyone with this spirit of rendering even practical services to Krishna, even if the norm of the relationship that one has with Krishna is not that way. In other words, his friends have no hesitation to climb on his shoulders and make fun of him and say, "We won, you lost, and now you have to carry me," and things like this, and in a relation where servitude would be abnormal. But yet, at times, they're also naturally inspired by their prema to serve Krishna, and so they let him rest his head on their lap and fan him while he has a nap and things like this. So this is one of the divine features of Braja Prem, or of the Leela of Braj, where there's such a thickness of affection that there's this natural outpouring of practical services in the flow of the intimate relations that Krishna has with his parents, with his friends and siblings, with the gopis. So this is said to be one of the unique features of Braja, that elsewhere in other dhams, the Vaishnavas or the Bhaktas, the Parikaras, they render service because of this sense of Aishwarya Gyan. But in the case of Braja, they render service not because of Aishwarya, but as an outpouring of the relish of his madhurya, free from any sense of aishvarya. So that's a very different type of servitude. It has a very different taste, if you will, or a different richness. So that bhav has a power to create that much of an unfolding of experience. This is the conclusion of the Shastra. This is what's experienced by the Mahatmas. But Mudalok nahi jani bhaveravai bhav, or the ignorant people, they don't understand that it's all about bhav, or that as per the bhav, all the experience, all the outcome will be determined. So, the reason we're bringing this whole point is that in the verse we're talking about, Mahaprabhu is praying for dasya bhakti, as per Kaviraj Goswami's explanation. So does this mean that Mahaprabhu is praying for dasya bhakti like a conventional person in samsara praying to the Parameshvara or to a bhakta of Narayan in a, what you might call a conventional manner of adoring the Supreme Ishvara? Not necessarily, and principally, no. Because Mahaprabhu came to give Braja Prem, and his Shikshastakam is teaching that. So the dasya that's being taught here is ultimately to be understood as this dasya that emerges from Braja Bhav as a result of the relish of Madhurya, not merely dasya in the more conventional sense. So that's why we're bringing all these citations. Vivid substantiation of this principle, that Sri Krishna's sweetness is relished only through the bhava of a bhakta, can also be observed in the case of Sri Krishna himself. Let alone the matter of others, Sri Krishna himself becomes desirous of drinking his own sweetness, and indeed endeavors to relish his own sweetness. Relish of that, however, does not occur without the bhav of a bhakta. Thus, he accepted the bhav of a bhakta, and appeared replete in full in the form of Sri Krishna Chaitanya. So Krishna had to appear as Mahaprabhu to also relish this himself. Thus, in the following verse from the Shikshastakam, Sriman Mahaprabhu's prayer for the gift of bhakti and servitude, and his making this prayer from the perspective of a jiva in samsara, can be understood to have a twofold intent. One intent is instructing the jivas bound in samsara in regard to their essential nature, their plight in samsara, their dependence upon Sri Krishna's grace, and their ultimate spiritual prospect in bhakti to Sri Krishna. The second intent is fulfilling his own desire to relish his own sweetness through the bhava of a bhakta. It was thus shown earlier in this section, in verse 64, that the natural disposition of a bhakta is to consider oneself to have not yet become a bhakta in the true sense, and rather to feel oneself to only be imperfectly aspiring to become a true bhakta. Sri Kaviraj Goswamipad also describes this same principle prior to his discussion of the fourth verse of Sriman Mahaprabhu's Shikshastakam, which is cited later here in Padyavali. In that verse, Sriman Mahaprabhu makes his first prayer in the Shikshastakam for bhakti, and Sri Kaviraj Goswamipad explains prior to his citation of that verse why even Sri Krishna himself, after having donned the bhav of a bhakta, still needs to pray to be blessed with bhakti. So you might think if Bhagavan wants to be a bhakta, he would already be so full of bhakti. Why would he be praying to get bhakti? So you can say, that's right, he is so full of bhakti that he feels himself to not have it. Because the nature of bhakti, or the nature of prem, is to make people feel that they don't have it even when they do. Therefore, Kaviraj Goswami writes, the nature of prem is that one in whom there is a connection with prem, i.e. one who has prem, thinks, I don't even have a trace of prem for Krishna. In other words, prem produces such an insatiability for Krishna's madhurya, an insatiability for reciprocation and service, that people feel that whatever they do, whatever they relish, is only a meager amount in comparison to all that they desire, and they feel that it's so small, it's negligible, and since it's negligible, it's absent, and therefore they have no prem, they have no bhakti. This point we've discussed earlier, we'll discuss it again later, so I won't elaborate further. Thus, in the following verse, the 5th verse of the Shikshastakam, which is cited next here in Padyavali, and in which Sriman Mahaprabhu prays for bhakti from the perspective of a jiva bound in samsara, it can be understood that the aforecited indication given by Sri Kaviraj Goswamipad, quote, in intense humility again Prabhu prays, that his adoption of this perspective and mood is not only for the sake of teaching the jivas who are actually bound in samsara, but rather is also an integral feature of his own relishing of prema bhakti in a manner completely free from any samsaric imposition. Since dainya, that is the quote, heartache arising from, there's a mistake, from one's feeling of a lack of bhakti to the lotus feet of Bhagavan, is quote, always highly favorable, parama anukulam, that is supportive of the manifestation of prema bhakti and greatly nourishing, mahapushti-karam, of prema bhakti, that is a cause of prema bhakti's greatly increasing, as was discussed earlier in the commentary on the verse Charnadapi Sunichena. So, Mahaprabhu, yes, he's teaching other people, but it's not merely that he's teaching other people. Even his praying in this sense like a jiva bound in samsara is also part of his own relishing of bhakti, because the humility that he's expressing in this verse is, you can say, the flip side of the coin of prayer, of prema, and is highly nourishing to prema, is a cause of prema's increasing. So it's part of his absorption in the bhava of a bhakta, part of his absorption in Krishna's madhurya and his relishing of Krishna's madhurya, and therefore it's not just some state that he's artificially adopted or just a literary premise by which he's teaching another, but it can also be understood to be a genuine state of mind that he's absorbed in, such that he's identified with at the time of expressing this, in such that he's relishing or fulfilling his purpose of his avatar in both distributing bhakti and relishing that bhakti himself. In this way, Swayam Bhagavan Sri Krishna, the embodiment of transcendence of samsara, and paramount fountainhead of prema bhakti for all beings, even a minute fraction of whose grace can effortlessly liberate innumerable jivas from samsara and imbue them eternally with prema bhakti, dons the mentality of a jiva bound in samsara, and in the course of personally relishing prema bhakti and its natural spirit of servitude, prays in abject humility to be graced with a state akin even to that of a most minute and insentient entity, for the sake of attaining prema bhakti and engagement in service with paramount fixity upon Sri Krishna, that is, his own self, the supreme object of the most rarefied of all forms of prema bhakti. So, this is, not easy to grasp. In other words, that Krishna himself is now going to act as if he's a bhakta without bhakti. But in acting as a bhakta without bhakti, he's actually showing himself to be supremely endowed with bhakti and relishing the humility of bhakti, in which one feels oneself to lack bhakti as a result of being so much absorbed in a profound degree of bhakti. So he who is the cause of everyone else attaining bhakti is now as if in a state of being in want of bhakti, and seeking bhakti from another who is in fact himself. So all these elements, blending together, we get this wonderful expression in the Shikshastakam. So I'll just read the verse, and then we'll dive into further discussion of its meaning in the next reading. Ayi nanda-tanūja kiṅkaraṁ patitam mam vishame bhavam buddho kripaya tava pada pankaja stita dhuli sadrisham vichintaya. Ayi, O son of Nanda, please graciously consider me, your servant who has fallen into the untraversable ocean of material existence, to be like a speck of dust fixed at your lotus feet. O son of Nanda, please graciously consider me, your servant who has fallen into the untraversable ocean of material existence, to be like a speck of dust fixed at your lotus feet. So I'll leave it there for today. If anyone has any comments, questions, corrections, or otherwise, please feel free to share.
I do.
Okay.
Pranam.
Pranam,
Thank you
pranam.
very much. This is very inspiring discussion. I really like that. And so many things popped up on the way while we were listening. But I didn't want to interrupt you. But let me just go back to my train of thought. So first of all, you gave this alternate meaning of Madhusūdana. And so Madhu meaning translating to samsara. But what's the original actually meaning of Madhusūdana? Because I don't recall the actual translation.
The most kind of default understanding is Madhu is an asura. So Madhusūdana means Bhagavan who slayed this asura named Madhu.
Okay, got it. And then I think, let me just think. Oh yeah, right. Those who obtain prema, they don't know it. Is it right to state?
Yeah. I mean,
So
generally speaking, there might be some occasions where people have some inclination, some notion of it, but principally they'll feel not.
and there's this. I recall this actually story, real life story that was spoken by Nanda-tanūja Babaji, who mentioned about judge from Calcutta. Maybe you know this story. Judge from Calcutta, who at one point, close to his retirement, he went to by the bank of Ganga. There was Bhagavatas Babaji, he was residing there, and from him he got Brahma Bhakti Chandrika, and he started reading Brahma Bhakti Chandrika, and as he was reading the book with full absorption, he was slowly being detached from his work as a judge, and finally gave up everything and just went traveling, moving about. He would end up in Navadvip, and he wanted to attend the class, some big sabha going on, and he was chased away because, oh, who are you? We don't know you. He was kind of strange behaving, and upon few times of his, approaching the door, trying to get in to listen to Harikatha, he says, what do you really want? And he said, I want to get prema. And when they saw his eagerness, they realized, oh my God, you already got prema. It was just a story that was spoken by Ananta. I just paraphrased it, so there was more to it. But so, what comes to mind also is Mahaprabhu, like he's hiding himself. Actually, I find similarities with Mahaprabhu attitude to hide himself as Bhagavan in a garb of a Vaishnava, to also Krishna in Goloka, who doesn't want to manifest his Aishwarya. If he does, nobody believes it. And so there's the Mahaprabhu carries the same mood, flavor, like he doesn't want to be exposed, just like Krishna. And I want to just draw this parallel that Mahaprabhu came to express himself in a way.
Gotta be tricky to be Bhagavan. You can't let being Bhagavan get in the way of what you want when you're Bhagavan.
Yes, totally.
You have to be Bhagavan, but then hide the fact that you're Bhagavan so that everyone doesn't think you're Bhagavan, so that you can relish what Bhagavan really loves, which is the prema of his Bhaktas. So he has to be Bhagavan, but hide that he's Bhagavan.
No, and also I also just reflect about this now, since we're talking, I just remember another point of these prayers. You said prayers of those who pray for mukti. Not all the mukti asking prayers are asking for actually mukti or freedom from samsara, but rather asking for grace of Bhagavan, by which they'll be removed from any obstacles to love him. But in the same prayer, it's hard to say even which one, because you don't know the outer mentality of heart. You may be praying the same way, but intention will be quite different, just to become free from everything disturbing and experience peace. So that's very tricky, and then comes to mind this verse that Śaraṇam Swami quotes, Vaishnava mudra vigena bujaya. We cannot judge Vaishnava by external behavior. I think it will apply here quite a bit. What do you say about that? And about the verse itself, because it seems that verse indicates that we cannot really judge Vaishnava based on behavior, which is true, but to some extent may not be, because you may be able to recognize who is Vaishnava. So,
since it's such a pleasure to honor all Vaishnavas, isn't it great that we don't need to be able to recognize exactly who they are or exactly what status they're in, since we're so fond of showing respect to them all?
Yeah, I like that. Nice thing. Yeah. You never know.
I mean, it's not like, sometimes we're not inclined to show respect if we really don't think that this guy's like any senior to me or not. It's not like we think like that. It's not like we find giving respect to people some kind of bruise to our ego that's unpleasant, and therefore we only do it when we feel forced to, or we're worried if it'll be awkward if we don't. It's not like that. We just love to show respect to all Vaishnavas we meet, and we're not really hung up on any of the details about what they exactly think or who they exactly are. And it's such a pleasure to again be reminded of Bhagavan and being present in their heart, that it's such a joy. And then who they are, where they are, since we don't need to know, we're free to carry on happily respecting everyone we meet and being nice all the time.
Yes. I remember there was even an example of, this is maybe a different angle, but Rupa Goswami, while meditating on Nita Vihar, in his meditation, he smiled, observing Krishna making some practice around. I don't remember exactly what was the content, but he smiled. At that point, Vaishnava was passing in front of him, and Vaishnava thought, oh, he's laughing at me. So he was disturbed. Not that he was disturbed in the sense of, oh, I just, who is this? Why is he laughing at me? But, just the thought caused his meditation to stop. And he tried to understand why. And then he understood that, this is maybe a different angle where I'm going now, but are you familiar with that? That small episode? Yeah. So can we just elaborate on that? In context of what we are talking actually about this hidden Vaishnava qualities and everybody to be respected. But, it was no offense, right? But still, there was a reaction.
Yeah, the Bhagavan is in the heart of the Vaishnava, and if the Vaishnava's heart becomes contracted in some way because of the behavior of another, then that's dissatisfying to Bhagavan. So in this case, although Rupa Goswami had absolutely no intention to show any disrespect, by the arrangement of providence, this other Vaishnava's heart got contracted because of his behavior, and so some consequence was still felt by him as a result of that. So we can take it that the essence of Vaishnavata is ultimately to be attuned at heart to the hearts of others, and to care that, the hearts of others are not bruised or contracted because of us, but rather expand and become enriched as a result of whatever behavior we show.
Yes, but at the same time, if Krishna is in the heart of Vaishnava, he's in the heart of that Vaishnava who is passing Rupa, and also in the heart of Rupa. So he knew, and if everything is based on intention, as we say, that mukti doesn't mean same thing for everybody, depending on intention. So then, if intention of Rupa wasn't to offend anybody, why there's reaction?
I mean, I think I tried to already address that although it wasn't intended, there was nevertheless, as a consequence of his action, the effect of some disturbance coming to the mind of that Vaishnava. So, I mean, intention is always principle, but it's not that, there is some significance to the way things play out even beyond the way that we intend them. It's obviously not the same, just as in the world, there's a difference between what they call manslaughter or third-degree murder or first-degree murder, the level of intent, the level of degree of premeditated, cold-blooded, harmful action, and something that happens due to some negligence which you should have accounted for, but it isn't in any way equivalent to having actually tried to kill someone. They make a distinction in that in law. So, similarly, there's, so many subtle grades of consequences of things relative to circumstances and intent.
Okay, that works. Yeah, thank you.
And perhaps we can also take it in the case of Rupa Goswami Pad that this is just a Leela of Bhagavan bringing out, the glory of his Bhaktas, that he holds those persons dear to him to such a fine standard that, what might not otherwise not have had any consequence is still shown to have a consequence, just to bring out how amazing their character is. That might be another way of looking at it.
Right. Yeah, there's so many factors in every... There's a verse that Krishna says that when Krishna does something, it has many purposes to it, not just one. Right? When he comes down to the earth, right? There's many reasons why he comes down as avatar, not only one. So in the same way, when he arranges things, like in this case, for example, there are many reasons. It's not just, to show there's the effect of the aparat, but also to show dearness to the Vaishnava to him. Anyway, thank you so much for nice. This was nice.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers. Say Radhe.
Radhe. Yeah, I see another hand.
Jaya.
Okay.
Pranam Baba. I have a question regarding Sri Vidya-Bhusnapada explanation of the name Madhusūdana as well. When he says that the meaning is that one who is able to remember Bhagavan, the samsara of such a person gets destroyed. The samsara gets destroyed by remembering Bhagavan. Is it meant in the sense that when Bhakta is able to develop constant remembrance of Sri Bhagavan, only in that case samsara gets destroyed? Or is it possible to think of it in the way that, for example, it's gradual, the destruction of samsara gradual in this case? For example, if someone is able to remember Bhagavan twice a day, like 5% of samsara gets destroyed. If someone is able to remember Bhagavan 5 times a day, then 20% of samsara gets destroyed. And as much person is able to develop more remembrance of Bhagavan, more of the samsara, the percentage of samsara gets destroyed. Is it possible to think of it in such a way, or is it only when Bhakta is able to develop constant remembrance of Bhagavan, only at that point when this constant remembrance is developed to the high degree, only then at that point samsara gets destroyed? What is the correct way to think of this definition of...
What do you think?
I don't know, that's why I'm asking. Is it like gradual destruction of samsara, or is it only when constant remembrance is developed? Perhaps like the samsara as the destruction of birth and death of a soul. It's only in the case of the constant remembrance, which is very difficult to develop. But if we think of samsara as suffering, like in general terms, maybe is it possible to think of it that remembrance of Bhagavan also destroys it gradually? I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
Okay.
Could you please
Well,
clarify?
fundamentally, we'll say that whether it's remembrance or it's kirtan or it's puja, those activities produce effects relative to the manner in which they're performed. In other words, if someone's remembering Bhagavan in enmity and with, the desire to harm him, that's different than someone, of an uttam bhakta doing so with no desire other than bhakti for him. Now, we know that even Kamsa, he was meditating, he was constantly thinking of Bhagavan, and he got liberated. He, by his constant remembrance out of fear, was also liberated. So however the mind connects with Bhagavan, that is ultimately beneficial and purifying with respect to liberation. Now, in terms of the attainment of, prem, that becomes a different category where remembrance has to also be enriched with the desire for bhava and with non-separate interest in being liberated for one's own sake and what have you. So there can be different outcomes depending on who's doing the remembering and what is their intention or the mentality with which they're doing the remembering. So when someone is doing the remembering with a completely pure psyche, who's with a complete absorption in uttama bhakti, then even one moment of remembrance could liberate them from samsara. We hear that one act of bhakti, even a semblance of an act of bhakti, can liberate someone from samsara. So, according to the level of purity, how much remembrance is happening or not happening, it becomes less significant according to the level of purity of the psyche of the performer. Whereas another person, they might be chanting 3 lakhs of harinam every day and, seen to be in so much remembrance of Krishna, but there they are, still on the earth, still in their body, not immediately liberated or what have you. So, according to how much purification has already happened, according to the purity of their intention, then if they're in a state of needing the psyche to be significantly purified, then that process will happen gradually according to the level of efficacy or the level of quality in their practice. So there's a lot of factors involved, so it's difficult to diagnose or to boil it down to one thing. We also hear from Chakravarti Pad in the commentary on the Sindhu, in that verse that I quoted earlier, that Viṣṇu is to be remembered always and never to be forgotten. He takes it that quote, always, or satatam, means every day, or for a significant portion of the day, since 100% constant 24 hours a day remembrance is not humanly possible. In other words, that would imply that one never sleeps, or at least never enters deep sleep forever. So we won't take it necessarily that the person has to remember Bhagavan literally constantly, but in general, that someone with, a purified mind with the aim of uttam bhakti, who engages in remembrance predominantly or pervadingly throughout their day, that this will be the standard or the ideal case in which we'll read this statement as per the line of bhakti that we're trying to follow. So in that case, we would say that, Bhagavan will certainly destroy the samsara of such a person, or Bhagavan will certainly liberate such a person so that they can realize their aspirations in devotion to him. So, does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And also, I want to just simply add here that when Bhakta prays for liberation, it's not to be peaceful as ultimate attainment, but basically not to be bothered to do service. Is that right?
Sorry, I missed the last word. Not to be bothered, and then what?
All I'm trying to say is that bothered to do service because samsara creates disturbance in bhakti. I mean, as a grihastha, we know it's just the trash. Samsara is an obstacle itself to do sadhana, to do bhakti, to really focus on Bhagavan. So liberation from samsara would entail, please, I don't want to be bothered with anything else except to be absorbed totally in Bhagavan. That way, liberation. Right?
Yeah. I mean, people can desire liberation for a variety of reasons, and in the case of the path of uttam bhakti, these prayers that we hear, as we mentioned, we'll take them, if we assume that they're being expressed from the perspective of an uttam bhakta, then we'll assume that the fundamental intent of the prayer is that the person wants to please Bhagavan, therefore the person wants to engage in bhakti to Bhagavan, and therefore the person wants to be free from what is unfavorable to bhakti to Bhagavan. But should Bhagavan be pleased with that bhakta undergoing some unfavorability, then they're ready and content for that unfavorability. If I have to, take birth again to serve, if that's what Bhagavan wanted, then bring it on, right? So they want that unfavorability to be removed so that they can please Bhagavan, provided that is pleasing to Bhagavan.
I see. So my interpretation not necessarily is right to say that they pray for samsara to disappear to do their peaceful service to the Lord. It's incorrect.
I mean, I don't know if it's incorrect, but it's one case among a number of other.
Okay,
it's an applicable case among many.
I see. Got it. Yeah, good to understand these things, these nuances. Just for oneself and just see how things work.
Yeah, I mean, in essence, the aim, the aspiration is for, as Jiva Goswami says, bhakti matra abhilash. When he glosses the word anyabhilashita shunyam from the Sindhu, he glosses it at bhakti matra abhilash, that I want only bhakti. But then if you go finer, right, why do you want bhakti? I mean, bhakti means actions that are pleasing to Bhagavan, but why do you even want to do that, right? So finer than that, as he comments in other places, is you want Bhagavan's pleasure. I want bhakti because I want to please Bhagavan. So the actual main thing, if you will, is that I want that Bhagavan is pleased. I want that. And from the other side of the coin, the reductive side is that the psyche doesn't function in any other way than the removal of pain and the pursuit of pleasure. This is how, the psyche functions. So to say that someone is ever truly not acting in a way that leads to some degree of accomplishment of happiness or avoidance of suffering is arguably impossible. Therefore, you have what they call this tat sukha sukhitva, or that one's own experience of sukh is married, if you will, or is made to be inseparable from Bhagavan's pleasure, or one makes the only feature of their own pleasure Bhagavan's pleasure. And that merging or that fusing of the two is purity and is, exaltedness, if you will, where one loses or has no taste in any so-called pleasure that isn't derived from or a result of Bhagavan's pleasure. In that way,
did you say insultedness? I'm sorry. Did you say insultedness? I'm getting
exaltedness, greatness.
Exaltedness. You understand? Okay.
So that connection of the two is, desirelessness, or nishkamatva, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask regards to also to break down this Ananya Bhakti Abhilash? What Abhilash, in my understanding, is the like interest or aspiration, maybe, or desire, deep desire, pleasurable desire. Is it right?
Yeah, the word Abhilash is a one of many words in Sanskrit, which generally means a desire or a want, a longing.
So can you break down Ananya Bhakti Abhilash in English so we can just grasp it?
I'm not familiar with this phrase. Are you referring to Anya Bilashita Shunyam?
No. The phrase you quoted, Jiva Goswami gave in Tika to Ananya Abhilash.
Okay, he says Bhakti Matra Abhilash.
Okay, Bhakti Matra Abhilash. Matra means only.
Mm-hmm.
Bhakti Matra Abhilash. It's only interest in Bhakti.
Yeah. In other words, the verse says no other desire. So what is the frame of reference for other? So he's saying bhakti is the reference point. So no other desire means you have desire for bhakti and nothing else or nothing other than that.
Wow. It's amazing.
And then also he glosses a point that Baba makes often is in the principal characteristic of bhava bhakti, he calls tadeka sprihatva, or desirousness only of Bhagavan. So you'll find in some cases he makes the point of reference bhakti, in other places he makes the point of reference Bhagavan. So, and in a third place, he merges the point, and whether it's you desire bhakti or you desire Bhagavan, the main fundamental most thing is to desire Bhagavan's pleasure. And that's how desire for bhakti and desire for Bhagavan are essentially synonymous in this line of thought. Because fundamentally the object is that you want Bhagavan to be pleased. And whatever is required of you for that, you're ready for that. That's where the whole Shikshastakam ends, right? Whatever yata va vidadhattulam poto. Whatever you do, you're my prananath. In other words, I'm still going to be devoted to you. I accept howsoever you're pleased.
So he said, you're Lampot.
Well, that comes later in Padyavali. We'll definitely dive into that when the time comes.
You can do whatever you want. I'm okay. Nice.
Alright, well, let's close it for tonight, and we'll go further here into the 5th verse of Shikshastakam next time. Vaishnavebhyo namo nama. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Shri Radhe Shyam.